Experiments. One day a long time ago when I was in school, we had to make hair gel in science class. I ended up with small purple crystals in my hair and red stains all over my clothes, a disaster. Have you ever carried out an experiment and had terrible results? Was it your fault? Maybe you thought that the experiments didn't work, but then you saw that it worked for others. What went wrong? Many things can go wrong during a science experiment. Sometimes we make mistakes when we interpret or write the instructions for the experiment. Maybe we think that the experiment is so easy that we do not need to read the instructions carefully. Maybe we just want to have fun and we skip some of the instructions. Well, all of these things are dangerous and can lead to unpleasant consequences. It is important to read the instructions carefully so that we can have fun and learn at the same time. First, let's discuss some recommendations for interpreting instructions. When we follow instructions for experiment, we have to make sure that we understand exactly what the experiment is about. It is not enough just to have an idea. The same principle applies to the materials needed for the experiment. Make sure you know all of them, and if you find something that you do not know or that you think could be dangerous, ask your teacher. Finally, read the instructions at least twice before you start the experiment. Take your time to do this because this is already a very important part of the experiment. After reading the instructions and making sure that you understand them, proceed with the experiment. If the instructions for an experiment indicate that an adult must be present, do not start the experiment until there is an adult supervising what you do. It is important to interpret the instructions correctly, not because there might be a huge explosion in the lab, but because if we do not follow the instructions step by step, the experiment might fail. Let's look together at an example. These are the instructions for a very simple experiment called the floating egg. A raw egg will float in very salty water, but will sink in plain tap water. Why? Salt water is denser than regular water. You need to make a highly saturated salt solution by dissolving 4 tablespoons of salt in 2 cups of water. Using pickling or cashier salt to make a salt clear salt solution. Table salt may be used, but the solution will be cloudy due to the additives used to make the salt free flowing. Ingredients: 1 or 2 eggs, 1 glass of water, 1 tablespoon, 1 cup of salt. As you can see, there is no list of ingredients here, so we have to interpret the text and create our own list. After reading the text, we can write a list of what we need. Now there are various kinds of salt mentioned in the text, as well as a technical term that is not clear, free flowing. It is tempting to just continue with the experiment without paying too much attention to words like kosher or pickling. But then, what if the experiment does not work because of something related to this? Since I do not know how important it might be for me to understand these words in order to do the experiment correctly, I have to look them up. An online dictionary would be very helpful here, or you could also use a regular dictionary. After looking up the words, you would find that pickling salt is a type of salt used for making pickles. Pickling. Pickling salt is especially pure, and it is typically very fine grinded to make sure that it dissolves easily. Cashew salt, also sold as rock salt, is a type of coarse salt. No sé qué es eso. Rough or loose in texture. Coarse salt that is usually made without additives. The salt itself is not necessarily kosher, but it takes its name from the curling process used on kosher meats. Kosher is an adjective that means the food or the place where food is sold, cooked or eaten, satisfies the requirements of Jewish law. After researching the requirements of Jewish law, I discovered that Jews have some restrictions about the way animals must be slaughtered and prepared, but not a word about salt. What can I deduce from these definitions in relation to the experiment? We can deduce that pickling and kosher salts are preferred because they dissolve more easily in water and because they do not contain additives, at least not as many as regular salt. This is certainly related to the experiment. Not to mention that we learned something interesting about another culture. But what about the word free flowing? Well, this is an easy adjective. That means that something dissolves easily. We can deduce this after looking up the word free and flow in the dictionary. Let us continue interpreting our experiment. The floating egg. Fill a glass half full with the salt water. Slowly add plain water by pouring it down the side of the glass, being careful not to mix the two liquids. Gently drop the egg into the water and watch as it sinks through the plain water, only to abruptly stop when it hits the salt water. The egg floats on the top layer of the salt water. I think these instructions are quite clear and easy to follow. What do you think? Now, let us talk a little about writing instructions for others to follow when doing an experiment. Before you start writing your instructions, remember to use neat handwriting and to check your spelling. Try to use short sentences and to be as precise as possible. Think about the experiment and start to write down the idea that comes to your head. Not in a crazy way, of course. Try to imagine that the order of events of your experiment in our previous example, we imagine someone dissolving salt in a glass of water, in a glass of water, filling half of another glass with it, pouring the fresh water, and finally dropping the egg inside. You can do the same with your own experiment. Imagine the sequence of events and start to make a list. Do you need another example of an experiment? Okay, let us blend some money and extract iron from it. This time we will pay more attention to writing the instructions for the experiment. Ready? The experiment is so good that you will always remember how to write the instructions for yourself. The idea is so simple. All bills contain a small amount of iron, even if you can't see that. Basically, the experiment is about blending a $1 bill in water. This way the iron is liberated and spread through the blender. For this reason, we need to pour the contents into a plastic bag and then gather the spread the spreaded iron with the help of a magnet. These are the things that we will need to perform our experiment. $1 bill, or you can make this experiment as expensive as you want. A blender, that is correct, the same one you use to make banana and chocolate milkshakes. A glass of water, a super strong magnet, a plastic bag to pour the mixture in, a resellable zipper store bag would be perfect. Before I write the final instructions, I will try to describe the events as clearly as possible. This will be my first draft. Later, I will check my work and put the instructions in order. We blend the bill with the glass of water. Someone pours the mixture into a resealable zipper plastic bag. Someone holds the plastic bag and shakes it. Someone pulses the magnet over the bag. After 1 minute, we all see the iron floating and gathering. This is my first draft. After making sure that the instructions are clear, I rewrite them and pay attention to the right order of the events. Remember that someone is going to follow them. The money blending experiment. Put the bill in the blender and add the water. Blend the bill for about 10 seconds. Pour the mixture into the plastic bag and make sure that it's closed. That is well closed. Shake the bag for about 10 seconds. Pass the magnet gently over the plastic bag and see how the iron follows the path of the magnet. After you finish writing down your instructions, take a moment to reread them and pretend that you are following them in order to carry out the experiment. This will help you to make sure that the instructions are clear without spelling mistakes and as precise as possible. Conclusions. Doing experiments can be fun and interesting, but they can be dangerous too. It is important to read, interpret, and follow the instructions correctly to make our experiments successful. When we are the ones writing down the instructions for an experiment, let us not forget that they should be written as clearly as possible. We do not want someone getting in trouble or having an accident if we can prevent it. Remember to follow all the indications in the text, especially the ones concerning with safety. If you have any doubts, always get advice from an adult.